It's the Beaver Banter Podcast. CJ Baumgartner, Ian Rivers here, bringing you the latest in Bemidji State athletics. And Ian, what's the latest been? I mean, not a ton going on Bemidji State wise, but college hockey's still pretty alive.
Yeah, I've had a pretty decent morning. Spent a couple hours this morning riling up Michigan fans on Twitter. That's kind of what I do. If you don't know me very well, I make a lot of jokes about Michigan Tech and Mankato, but I think everybody needs to realize that Michigan is the real enemy here. And obviously on the Beaver Sports Podcast, it's not going to get brought up a bunch, but I definitely will never be caught dead giving credit to anything Michigan Wolverines. So,
See, it's your Gopher fandom combining with your Michigan State fandom coming together.
yeah, and I get a lot of like crap for that because everybody's like, how do you cheer for all these teams? Like, those are two Big Ten teams or two Minnesota teams. You can't cheer for both of them. And I'm like, watch me. And for like Michigan State, it's more about the basketball side of it, right? And if Michigan State football or hockey ends up being good, it's just like a bonus. And for Minnesota, obviously, I live here and I grew up. It's just the only D1 sport for most sports. So I watched a ton of football, and hockey's like big time for me growing up. And then if basketball's good, it's like, oh, cool, go for basketball is good for once in a millennium. But and then you go to BSU and you get attached to the university, and now we're doing this. And so yeah, and I have a really hard time, man, being a neutral sports observer. If I'm sitting down watching like a Panthers Falcons game mid-October and it's the only game on TV because it's Thursday night football or something, it's like, am I really just going to sit here and watch this just because I like football? Like, no, I need to cheer for something. And if I
You need to be
can't, like,
hating somebody's guts right now.
yeah, if you can't like tie it into like, oh, how does this help the Chargers or the Vikings? Like, then it's kind of just whose uniform is cooler, who has a player that I really like, or fantasy football or something like that. So it's just hard for me to be a neutral sports observer sometimes. But
Yeah, give me an
yes, you're
example.
absolutely
Give
right.
me an example of something you've said that is ticked off like half of the state of Michigan right now.
Well, right now it's the Hobie hat trick just got announced, which is the three finalists for the Hobie Baker Award, and I'll touch on that in a second. But Adam Fantilli, one of college hockey's best players right now, the Michigan forward, is one of the front runners, and he of course made the hat trick. And I've just been going back and forth, basically with no backing to my own argument, other than Logan Cooley is better by a wide margin than Adam Fantilli, and I personally think Fantilli will probably win the award. I wouldn't vote for him. Like I said, I have a slight bias towards Minnesota players, but I don't know. I think it's not so far apart that all these people are saying it's easily Fantilli, it's easily Fantilli, he's the best player, he's the youngest player. And I'm like, he's only the best player because he's all alone on his line. He has to carry the team, which isn't even true. But like, just riling up the Michigan fans is always a fun time for me. I've as I've grown older, I've gotten a little bit away from it, but every once in that, it's still fun to just cause chaos for chaos sake.
Might as well.
So the other two finalists, like other than Fantilli, I touched on Logan Cooley, and then the one that's surprising, I think, to most people is Matthew Nyes of the Minnesota Gophers getting that third nod. I think that Lane Houston, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, from BU, is probably a better candidate for that third spot. I think he had the most points from a defenseman in, like, I can't remember the exact amount of years, but a lot of years. And he's been having a fantastic season. And then the other one will be Jason Poland of Western Michigan. Those are two guys that I would have probably, and taking nothing away from Matthew Nyes, and I don't know what goes into it. Like, I'm not in the room when they're deciding this, so maybe the fact that Nyes has just meant so much to this team in terms of a leadership standpoint. Because he's playing with two freshmen on his line and being able to corral those guys and their egos and stuff and make sure that they play the right way. Or so I don't know if that's anything into what they consider, but I was a little surprised when they had two Gophers in that Hobie hat trick. But I think, like I said, as unfortunate as I'm not going to end up riding over it, but I think Fantilli will probably win that award. The only thing that seems to have any sort of call out against him would be like the fact that the Hobie's supposed to be like a kind of a character award as well. And he of course has that one instance against Michigan State earlier this year where he got like he cross-checked somebody in the back of the head or something like that. Some play that ended up giving him a major penalty, and the character concerns coming off of that. But I think Cooley even has a 5-minute major at some point this season too. So it's, that I think when that's the only thing going against him, he's probably fine. And I do think he's one of the best players in college hockey. But I will never tell him that to his face.
Well, I think this is just the NCAA trying to make up for that whole East Coast bias thing. So they figure if they throw the Hobie guys, the nod.
Well, I've changed my mind on that a little bit to a certain extent because being at the Fargo regional and seeing a couple people, I saw Chase, one of our listeners, and got to see Lucas and have a very short conversation with him. And I know there was other people there too that have reached out to us as Beaver fans, but the atmosphere was just great. And I think honestly, I completely did a 180 from before the week started to now, where as long as it makes sense, right? Minnesota was a 1, St. Cloud State was a 2, and Mankato was a 3. That makes sense. Let all those fans get an opportunity to see that. A lot of times the best team's going to prevail, whether or not, it's you're splitting hairs between St. Cloud State and Penn State. When it comes down to just the pairwise, it's so close between 6 and 8 anyways, that as long as they're both on that 2 line, it really doesn't matter which one you send. Now, if it would have been Boston University that you decided to pair up with the Gophers, one of the 5 teams that had kind of been like in that top 5 all year long, then you would have had more red flags. But as long as it makes sense, I think geographically sending teams to the best spot to get more fans in attendance, it probably isn't a bad thing, because I think what we have to accept is that it's probably not going to be perfect, especially with only 16 teams in the tournament. You're probably going to have some people like Denver. They got the short end of the stick being the lowest 1 seed. They had to fly across the country to go play in New Hampshire. So it's just never going to be a perfect system. Nobody's ever going to get to play. I doubt that they go to the whole on-campus sites thing. So I just think that the one thing that really does tick me off still is just having 3 regionals, like basically on the East Coast. If they switch that up and like said, all right, 2 of them are east of Ohio and 2 of them are west of Ohio, and like that's how it goes, like that's fine with me.
Yeah. Where was it when Bemidji State won against Wisconsin? Where was that at?
That was in Bridgeport, which is another issue.
Yes.
Like they don't have that many regionals, and I'm sure, like I talked about, it goes deeper than just like you can't just force a city to host a regional. They have to want it, they have to bid for it, and I'm
Hmm.
sure it's a lot of these cities just rebidding because nobody else is bidding against them. But like Bridgeport's had it probably 3 to 5 times in the last 10 years, and so it's when you send it so often to the same cities, it starts to get stale and that sort of thing. But it was Bridgeport, I believe. I'm 99% positive when we upset Wisconsin there.
Yeah. All right. So, anything else you want to talk about, Ian, with that atmosphere in Fargo, with just the first weekend of NCAA hockey tournament play? Anything else?
Well, it was a fairly boring tournament for the first 2 days. Like, I mean, obviously my Gophers bias aside, is that game was great against Canisius, at least the second half of it when they finally woke up and started scoring. But other than that, I mean, I think the plus minus between winning and losing teams was plus 47 for the winning teams. And obviously with 8 games, the lowest it could be is plus 8, right? Because every team at least has to win by 1. But 47, like that's an insane number. 11-1 for Michigan over Colgate. Penn State 8-0 over Michigan Tech. And like that's the one game I actually was rooting for Tech to win, because just like go ahead and represent the CCHA a little bit. And Penn State hadn't played in like 3 weeks, and Pietila is such a good goaltender. I was like shocked to see that end 8-0 in Penn State's favor, even in Allentown, which is like right down the road from college, college Valley, College Park,
Happy Valley.
Happy Valley.
Yeah. Well,
College State. I
look,
was thinking College Station, and I'm like, no, that's Texas
that's
A&M,
well, you were also thinking maybe College Park,
because
Maryland.
that's Maryland, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I'm like,
But I was also thinking, with some of these teams getting blown out, I mean, if the toothpaste school could lose by 10 goals, then surely the Beavers could have also did that.
well, and that's what like was so shocking. And it's another reason that it's like, well, how can we really trust that the 6th place team in the country is better than the 8th place team? Because the 9th team in the country beat Harvard, the 7th team in the country, 8-1. And so it's like this, the pairwise is pretty accurate, but it's at the end of the day, between 7 and 9 or 6 and 8, you're splitting hairs between those. And like you said, I mean, it really, the one thing that I was thinking about the whole time watching all these schools get blown out, I'm like, well, shit, Alaska could do this. Put them in instead of one of these. Like, man, that was upsetting that we didn't get to at least watch them. But the second day, or I should say Saturday, Sunday, the regional finals were a lot closer. I think Minnesota and St. Cloud State being 4-1 after the empty netter was probably the biggest margin of victory. I think BU over Cornell was 2-1, then 4-1, and then I think it was actually maybe 4-1 for Quinnipiac over Ohio State after some empty netters. But and then the Michigan game, Penn State almost had them, man. They were playing really well in that game. Michigan, seeing some of the fans interact, they were like, man, this seems like the classic Michigan tournament game where we just come out and it's not enough at the beginning, and then we can't climb back into the game. But they ended up scoring with like 10 minutes to go and then winning less than a minute into overtime. So it's going to be a gauntlet of a Frozen Four coming up next weekend. Minnesota and Boston University, and then Michigan Quinnipiac is going to be. It's good. It's almost the exact opposite of the basketball tournament where you're looking at all these upsets that happened, and now you've got like, who are
Then you
these
have Florida
guys?
Atlantic, who's 2 games away from being the national friggin' champions.
Like I used to watch so much college hoops, man. I used to literally be so into it. I would wake up in high school on a Saturday morning and I would start watching college basketball at 11 a.m. and I'd watch for like 14 hours straight until 1 a.m. when like Pepperdine and Cal Fullerton like ended their game. And I'm like still watching college basketball at 1 a.m. And that's how into it I was. And I don't watch as much of it anymore, if barely at all, because I've been following hockey so much closer this year. But just the thought of, I thought about that like in the Elite Eight. I'm like, is Florida, like, imagine if Florida Atlantic actually, just saying that, like going through the wiki page and looking at all the national champions, you're like, yeah, Duke won it, and there's
A national
Kansas and North
championship
Carolina,
banner
like
hanging from their
Florida
gymnasium
Atlantic, like
where they
what?
have pull-out bleachers.
And they have a reasonable, it's not like some of these years where you see these guys get in and it's like, well, it's 11 seed VCU and now they have like 3 1 seeds that they're playing against or something like that, where it's like, no, they play like San Diego State, don't they?
Yeah,
And and then the best team in it, I think, is UConn,
UConn,
who
yeah.
just seems to come up out of nowhere every 4 years and win a national championship. It's
So
just,
it must be their time. It must be their
yeah.
time.
I mean, it must be that year again. Oh, is it the UConn year now? Okay, yep, I guess it is.
Nice.
But
Yeah, well, and here's the thing with the NCAA hockey tournament and with Bemidji State is, I mean, Bemidji State probably isn't getting into the tournament. I mean, you'd have to expand it to a very large number of teams for Bemidji State to actually get into the tournament. Ian Rivers, would you ever be in favor of expanding the Division I men's hockey tournament?
yeah, I would. I don't know about right now with only 62, and next year it'll be a little bit bigger. Obviously, Augustana is coming in. I think Robert Morris is coming back, so it'll be 64, I think. But 16 out of 64, that's 25% of the field that gets in. I feel like that's, I mean, a pretty decent amount. That's pretty similar to college basketball, I would have to say. 68 out of like 360 or something like that. So I think in the future, if you continue to see expansion and it gets up over 70 to closer to 75 teams, I think there should be a precedence of like, maybe we want to go up to 20 or 24. And I don't know which one they would do. Maybe if you go to 24, you just give the top 4 seeds a bye. And if you're only going to, I think that would be the top 4 seeds that would only get a bye, but like, expand it to 20 or something to get a couple more teams in, so that when you have these teams like Alaska, that are so close that just didn't play in a conference, and that's the one thing that really hurt them, you give them a chance to at least play a play-in game and try to get in something like the first four in college basketball. So I think that there is something there, but I think this year kind of set the maybe the
Yeah,
expansion back a little bit, seeing like, man, maybe 16 is too much
maybe it should
at
just
the
be
end
the
of the
Frozen
day.
Four outright.
But this is a little bit of a weird year because I think everybody thought coming in like, man, these teams are all so close, like who's really going to win it? um and then you just have the four, I think, best teams at the end of the day, that ended up winning and moving to the Frozen Four. But it's hard in college hockey, I think, to gauge a little bit of how good teams are, because you really, yeah, you have a couple non-conference games, but you're not playing more than 3 or 4 out of conference
You're beating up
series.
on your conference. Everybody in the conference is beating up on each other every year. And it's in weekend series. And again, like that's just the best way to do it for like in this situation. But yeah, like you're alluding to, is there's a lot of times where St. Thomas can beat a Mankato. And does that mean Mankato's bad? Does that mean St. Thomas is good? Like, it like you said, it throws a wrench in that kind of thought process.
Well, and that's the thing. The Big Ten was so dominant this year in the regular season. Everybody's like, well, it's the Big Ten. They always do this crap, and then they get into the tournament and they look like fools. And I think the Big Ten teams won by like 30 some goals in the first round. It was 9-2 for Minnesota, 11-1 for Michigan, 8-0 for Penn State, and 8-1 for Ohio State. Everybody's like, okay, no, they're not messing around. This is but you can't tell because they've only played 3 or 4 teams out of their conference. And when it comes to a team like Bemidji, how many of those like weekends are pretty much like set? Like I remember back when I was in school, it's like, well, we know that 2 of our weekends are going to be North Dakota and Duluth, and then randomly we're going to have one of these East Coast schools like Princeton, or I remember they
Maybe St.
played
Cloud,
Merrimack one, yeah, maybe St. Cloud this year. And so that's
Duluth.
kind of
Yeah.
like you play the same teams over and over again. It almost feels like a conference game. And so you're really not getting a judgment of how good Bemidji State is against the field of the country rather
Mm,
than just against the teams that they play every year. And so that's, I think, what makes it difficult to predict actually how good a team is, even with a system like pairwise in place.
yeah, exactly. So, anything else, Ian, with the NCAA tournament? Anything else, or should we move on to women's hockey here?
Yeah, I guess we can touch on women's hockey. The Beavers have been struggling to fill or to keep holes filled. I think Lucas said there's 6 now players that have left the program that
The portal
weren't
giveth and the
just,
portal
yeah.
taketh away.
And man, I mean, I don't want to say anything like, but if these guys are going 5-30, what program are they going to where they're going to like improve I don't know. I mean, again, it's like
Well, if you're a
maybe they
starter
just
on that team and you leave, theoretically, you could be like a come on like the second or third line
on
on
like a
like an
Mankato
average
or a
team.
St. Cloud State or something like that,
Yeah.
maybe. But I don't know. That's the one thing that I would question. But I mean, I get it. Like, it's not a good program right now. They're not having their best days. And so this is the same thing we see happen in sports where, you know, uh, look at the Gophers basketball program. They're at like an all-time low right now. Maybe not really, but like, and guess
They're
what?
pretty low.
They have nobody on the team for next year. I can't like think of a single guy that's like still there.
Yeah.
But it's like, dude, it's gonna be tough to try to fill those holes and try to rebound from what was already a pretty bad season, and now you got to basically get a whole new roster in here and go from there. That's going to be pretty difficult, but we'll see how they can rebound. Maybe they get some new blood in here, some new faces, and sometimes that's all it takes. Is like, yeah, you get some new guys in here that aren't or girls in this situation that aren't really familiar with. Well, I'm sure they'd be familiar with the program's like non-success, but they're not here for it. They haven't been here losing for 2 or 3 seasons now, and it's just a fresh start for them, and they're excited to get to play. So I guess that's my only hope for the direction the program's headed. But losing 6 players after a season like this, and that doesn't even include like the seniors that were like graduating.
Yeah. Well, I
Definitely
think
not.
based off what Lucas said on Twitter, again at Beav Territory, go follow him. Great guy, great follow on Twitter. 4 sophomores, and a couple of those were Ella, Anik, and Taylor Larson. 4 sophomores, 1 junior, and then Reese Hunt leaving as a grad transfer. So that makes 6.
Yeah. So, man, like I said, it's going to be a slog getting forward, trying to fill those holes and then figure out where everybody belongs on what line. And it's nice to have familiarity from year to year with team cohesion and stuff like that when you've got these people. And I think when the COVID eligibility kind of phases itself out, everybody's still using those 50 years and stuff for right now. Once that stuff kind of phases itself out, I think it will slow down a bit, but especially for now, it's hard, man. A lot of teams, and that's why I'm kind of shocked that the Beavers men's team, we haven't not seen, to the best of my knowledge, one person so far announce that they're transferring in or out of the
Knocking
program.
profusely
So
on wood here.
yeah, exactly. And so and they've been done for a while. Like some of these teams, like St. Cloud State, has already had two guys, I think, announce that they're transferring out of the program, and they just finished up on Saturday. And so, like, we've been done for 2 weeks before that, and we still haven't had anybody so far announce that they're looking to get out of the program. So I guess that's a good news for the men's program, but for the women's, hopefully they can get some bodies in here and field a competitive hockey team next year, because I think we would all enjoy having a little bit more than a couple early season wins to talk about.
Yeah, and so we talk about the transfer portal impacting the women's hockey team. A little bit has crept in now to the men's basketball team. So according to Verbal Commits D2, it says Bemidji State guard Jace Lohman, so this basketball, has entered the transfer portal. So a key piece for Bemidji State's NSIC tournament run on that team. He's now hitting the portal. And interestingly enough, as I look back on this post, Ian, there was a tweet, a comment on Lucas's tweet that's from Swisher Field, Wolf Nation for Life, Northern State alum. That's what his Twitter bio says. And his comment says, if he continues his basketball career, comma, he'd like to team up with Moni, Moni. That must be a player of some sort. There doesn't come to mind right away, but interesting little tidbit, because I believe Lohman is from Mandan, or at least from like central North Dakota. So it's an
Okay.
interesting little tidbit. But you're always, no matter how good of a season you have or poor of a season, there's always going to be, especially with the transfer portal being so easily accessible, there's always going to be something. And I think just his loss is going to sting. But like we've talked about off air a little bit, Ian, what exactly does this transfer mean? Is it feuding with Boshi? Not saying that these are happening, but like, is it doesn't get along with Boshi? Is it doesn't get along with his teammates? Is it just not liking living in Bemidji or being on the campus? Is it wanting to go play for somebody else? Is it wanting to, a whole bunch of things? Is it a bunch of prospects coming in that could potentially threaten his playing time? Ian, we're just kind of guessing here, but what do you think?
Well, I think it could be any number of those things. And I think that's something that I used to like. A lot of people say, like, oh, look at Michigan State basketball just had Pierre Brooks yesterday just announced he's transferring out, and half the comments are good for Pierre. Hopefully he gets some more playing time wherever he lands. And the other half are people that are like, dude, look at him running from the grind. Like, he was clearly going to be a focal piece of this team going forward. And it's like, no, he wasn't, because the Spartans have a top 3 recruiting class in the nation coming in, and he already didn't get playing time. If Tyson Walker comes back for his 5th year, then it's going to be less for him, and he's already a sophomore going on his junior year. So, and I think there's so much that goes into it. You listed off like 10 different reasons that a player could transfer out. Maybe it has nothing to do with basketball. Maybe it's just like, man, I lived in central North Dakota. I thought I was going to be fine leaving for Bemidji, and
That's like 8 hours
it
away.
turns out I don't really like being this far away from home. And
6 hours, four
that's
hours maybe, but yeah.
exactly. And so maybe he just wants to be, oh, there wasn't really an opportunity for me to play at like Minot State or something, just for an example, like a closer school, that maybe he did want to play at. And now there's an opening or something, and he thinks he can get closer to home to have more family and friends be able to come watch him. I'm not exactly sure. There's so much that could be, and maybe it is. Maybe it is like, I don't know what the recruiting situation looks like for Bemidji, but Kone was going to leave. But he already, like you said, he was a focal piece, but he didn't really touch the court that much, and maybe that shows to him like, man, we have um, Williams who got hurt in the tournament, and I'm still not really seeing that much playing time. We're already a shallow team. We don't have a lot of depth.
Mm-hmm.
That really tells you what the coach thinks about you. I mean, I know I'm just a freshman, but man, I've been working hard, and maybe it's something to that. But without being there, without talking to him directly, you would never really know exactly what it is. But there's so many other human elements to the transfer process that I think just saying like, oh man, this guy's running from the grind, man. If you can't get minutes at Bemidji State, you're not going to get minutes anywhere else either. Like, coming at him like that. And I haven't seen that. I don't think anybody's going to say that to him, but I think that's a good thing to kind of think about. It's just like, there's so many more elements that probably go into this kid's, thought process when it comes to transferring in and out.
Right.
So
Exactly. Well, and it's like any other thing. It's like, you don't even have to necessarily hate the coach or think that he's a scumbag or something like that, to just look at it and be like, I don't really like playing for this person. I'd much rather like to go. It's like a person at a job. You know what I mean? Like, I don't really necessarily care for the way that this guy likes to conduct his business. I would much rather go like to be a part of this other business. And that's kind of the same thing that can happen. And again, it's how the thing goes. But, you know, key piece, a piece, whatever his role was going to be. Like you said, still a freshman, so a lot of room to grow. And especially as we talked about at the end of the basketball season, Ian, for Bemidji State, there's a lot of opportunity for these guys to grow together and form that young core. And that's what Bemidji State has never really had because so many guys have transferred out and you haven't quite been able, or you've taken in too many junior college players and they kind of clog up the land, they kind of clog up the pathway for some of these kids, but you also need a veteran presence. And there's like a little bit of that where you've just quite never been able to keep a team together in the last, I would say 6 or 7 years of BSU basketball. It's really felt that way where you just can't get a core to ascend together. And with this crew that they had doing really well, you thought maybe this was the chance to kind of keep going. And it still does for all intents and purposes. This doesn't throw off Bemidji State's path drastically, but it does change how you look at things.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, like you said, he wasn't one of those key players. He wasn't one of
He's
those
not
guys that we
Sutherland or
had in
Koenig.
there.
Yeah.
Exactly, but it still is a little bit frustrating seeing some of these guys leave. And I think that, you know, I kind of understand where the transfer portal comes from. It's a love-hate relationship because you're saying like, man, it'd really be nice to get these guys to commit to a program and actually, you know, stay here and all this and all that. And I think it's the same way. It's like, well, especially at bigger programs like D1 programs, like, man, I committed to the University of Cincinnati to play football. We had a 13-0 season and then lost in, you know, the college football playoff, and our coach goes and leaves. But I'm a freshman. Like, I wanted to play for this guy. I didn't come in to play for Joe Schmo, who just got hired after this guy left for Wisconsin or whatever. You know, I came to play for this guy. And so maybe you want to transfer out, or maybe there's some guys that literally like, I am a Minneapolis kid, I came to play for the Gophers, I don't care if Flex gone or here, this is the program I want to play for. And I think so many people just get attached so much to the players playing for their programs. But yeah, I think it is difficult. You want to have as much cohesion year to year, same thing as I talked about with women's hockey. You want to have, you know, the same people on the team. You want to cheer for those people that have coming up. And that's what makes it so great to root for seniors a lot of times, because you're like, wow, this guy was here through the bad times. And now he's like 4 years later and he's one of the leaders on the team and he's getting his buckets. So I think that's what a lot of people want to root for. And that's why people have such a negative opinion on the transfer portal. And I don't think that Lohman was ever going to be like a key piece in basketball. A lot of times you can kind of tell when a player is going to be a key player from the second they get there. Like, they might not get a ton of minutes, but you can tell the coach is trying to work them into the rotation. And with Lohman, it was kind of just like, you're the next guy that we have. And so I don't wish him I wish him fair, how do I say, not fair travels is what I was about to say, but like, you know what I mean? Like, good luck
Ian says,
wherever he
don't let the door
lands.
hit you on the way
Yeah,
out of town.
exactly. Oh no. Good luck wherever you land, Jason. Hopefully we can set up an early season non-conference game with wherever you end up, so we can show you what you're missing out on.
Yeah, exactly. Missing out on all this snow that Bemidji has. So you can't get that everywhere.
Well, and
Uh,
that's like, if he's going to stay close to home, if that's like the thing, then what's the difference between like North Dakota and Bemidji? But you know,
yeah.
so weather wise, it really depends on where he goes. And I can, if he ends up going to play D2 basketball in like Tampa, Florida, then I can say, oh well, you know, maybe it was a weather thing for him or something like that. But
Right.
we'll see.
So let's take a quick look here, Ian, at some of the spring sports as we again, winter is not quite done yet in Bemidji. Now, I'm in central Minnesota. You're in the southern part of central Minnesota, but there's still, I mean, just a whole heck of a lot of snow where you are. There's progressively more where I am, and there's progressively more in that upper third of the state, in the Duluths to the Grand Rapids to the Bemidji's
Yeah, I thought,
to
man,
the
I thought we
Crookston.
had a ton of snow down here, and then I went up to Fargo this weekend, and like, man, they have not gotten any melt. And I was talking to
No,
Ben about it,
and
my brother,
supposed to
and
get
he's like,
more
no, because
tomorrow,
every
by the
time it's
way.
like, yeah, he's like, every time it's in the high 30s down there where you're at, it's in the low 30s or high 20s up here. So it just doesn't melt at the same rate. The sun can only do so much.
Well, it's why when people talk about the Gophers and they're like, "Oh, it's cold in Minneapolis," and it's like, bro, come up to Bemidji. It's way like
That
it's
was
a
my
people from
favorite thing to
Chicago will
do.
say that Minneapolis that it's a different kind of cold in Minneapolis compared to Chicago, and it is. It's another level of cold to go all the way up north to Bemidji.
Yeah. Well, and the difference between like Fargo and like the North Dakota, it's so flat there. So funny story. I went to the games and I found a parking spot. But I drove past it because I'm like, well, I just parked on Thursday, I parked in the parking lot. So I'm gonna drive up there. Oh no, it's $10, right, to park in here. And I had $6 cash on me because like why would I ever keep cash on me anymore? So I had to drive back around the block to try to get to that parking spot on the street. There's one left. And so it's like a block and a half walk to the arena now. Gotta walk around to the other side. And I'm like, I don't want to bring my jacket because I don't want to keep it inside with me. I'm gonna overheat if I keep it on. So I'm just walking in my Gophers jersey to the arena, get up there, hand the guy my ticket. He scans it. He's like, oh, this one doesn't, this is a Thursday ticket. And I'm like, oh, I left the Saturday ticket in the envelope. I thought I had swapped them after the game on Thursday. I didn't. So I had to go back to my car in the wind. And it's just like, dude, this is a different level because it's like not the in Bemidji, there's wind because you're on a lake right on campus, but like North Dakota just does not have anything to break it up, and so it gets nasty out there, and so it's a different level even from Bemidji to like Fargo from cold.
Yeah, it's not great. Basically, in short, why do we all live here? I think is pretty much the takeaway. But Bemidji
Because the
State,
2 months of summer we get are like the best time of the year.
I know the 2 weeks, it's awesome.
Yeah.
So with Bemidji State baseball, that's not happening yet. So they've switched sites for their series with Augustana and Winona State. This was just announced late this morning, that they've reversed sites for their upcoming series with Augustana and Winona State. The Beavers will now travel to Sioux Falls on April 2nd for a 3-game NSIC conference series against Augustana. They'll play 3 games with a doubleheader on Sunday, followed by a game Monday at noon. BSU will then travel to Winona for a doubleheader. Bemidji State, by the way, 2-23 on the season. They did get their first conference win over the course of this week. They're 1-9 in the NSIC, although Augustana is 16-12 and they're 5-3 in the conference.
Yeah. Some of these scores, man, they do not make you feel good about the state of this program right now. It's not to beat a dead horse because it's kind of what we brought up even before the spring season started is like, man, this is going to be, we don't have high expectations. It's just never historically been that good. But man, you
And
see
well,
some
in
of
the
these score
infrastructure, and we've
lines.
said it before on this podcast,
Yeah,
the infrastructure for a baseball program is poor and it's out of the university's control. I think the BSU baseball field, it's not, is it is it a cathedral division 2 baseball? No, but I think it's a nice baseball field. I think they try to do their best to keep up with it. And I think Bemidji State has a nice field, but they can't get anybody to come up there because if you're a baseball player, why would you want to play there? Why not go play in
well,
Winona or
and the
in
school
Mankato
year,
where you can play a couple weeks earlier?
yeah, and the school year kind of dictates your schedule. Like the best case scenario for a college baseball program, like in the NSIC, because I'm sure even in Upper Iowa, it's probably not the best conditions right now to play baseball. So, like, if this right now, April was the start of your season instead of March, right, or late February, maybe you start like push it a month back and then you're playing into the summer. But like, how many guys then are you going to want to play college baseball when it's like, well, yeah, but we could be done by May as soon as the school year's out, and then
Well, and
bring
then it's an
home.
NCAA tournament thing too, because the NCAA tournament starts at a certain point, and that's the entire country. So there's real powerhouse baseball programs in Florida and Texas and California, and they're like, no, screw the teams in Minnesota. Why would we play when it's hotter? Like, why would we want to play in late June?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
It's just that's the unfortunate part about it is like you could actually have some decent conference game weather because like you said, the field is actually in and of itself pretty nice. Like I've been to a couple of games there when it was actually nicer out in late April one year. We went and watched some baseball because we had nothing going on. And of course, Oak Hall is right there. If you have the right room, you can watch a game out your window. So but at the end of the day, it's just not great. Like you said, the infrastructure for us is it's a hockey town for a reason, and that's because you can play hockey up there almost year round. So
exactly. And with Bemidji State baseball too, and just kind of the issues that they face, it's hard because they play more games. They actually do play a decent amount of games on that field in Bemidji State, but it's playing amateur ball for the Bemidji Blue Ox than it is actually playing games for the college you committed to. Like if you're a commit from the cities and you want to live in Bemidji year round to train and do all that stuff, you're going to play town ball for the Blue Ox, and they make the state tournament in amateur ball every year because they're full of Division II baseball players.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. So
It's,
it's just not the best, like we talked about. We can say it all we want, and it's just the same story every time. It's the infrastructure, and there's nothing the school can do about it. It's just the weather. And unless the season somehow flipped and somehow, we're getting warm weather in March up here, it's just not going to go well.
yeah. So looking at some other stuff that's going on across campus, Ian, in terms of softball, of course, we talked about last week that, it's tough to play some games on that field, had to get a couple pushed back due to how cold it is because the snow isn't as big of an issue. But if it's cold like it is today, you have metal bats, they're going to break and they're expensive and they take a while to get. So teams aren't just going to want to break them. But Bemidji State has a couple games coming up on the schedule here. They are in Aberdeen, South Dakota for a doubleheader against Northern State. Then they go to Moorhead to play a doubleheader. And then in the middle of next week, we'll play Minot State is looking to be their thing. So they haven't played really since the middle of March, since March 19th. And we've already talked about those games. Anything else going on with the spring sports, Ian?
Not that I've heard. No big storylines. I know track and field. I think, do they have a home event coming up here pretty soon? I think that was like one of the first things on the.
Haven't checked on the schedule recently, but I mean, it seems like it's be pretty close. I know that the Gillette's facility is filled with high school kids getting in all their track meets right now.
Beavers to open outdoor track and field season this week. Okay, at Yellow Jackets / Battling Bears open. So I misread that. I thought it was they're opening
They're going to Billings,
their
Montana for that, by the way.
track season. Yeah, so that's quite a hike. But I expected to probably be a little bit nicer in Billings than it would be here.
The mountains at least are a
Maybe,
little.
yeah, maybe fractionally. Again, it's just that it's a different type of cold there than it is here, where it's just kind of sheer cold.
Mm-hmm. Bemidji State men's golf gets third place at the NSIC preview. That also happened just a couple
They
days
seem to be
ago.
doing. There's been quite a few good headlines for the men's golf team so far that have poured out this year. So I guess give credit to them. They've been killing it on the golf scene so far.
Bemidji State hashtag golf school.
We're a golf school now.
We're a golf school now. I'm sorry. That's just how it works. And you get the golf simulator set up in the glass field house and you're set.
Yeah, and I'm laughing about this. I don't want to like make any golfers upset. Like if you guys listen, like good for you. I'm happy for you. It just doesn't like I can't name off the top of my head some of the best golf programs in the country, even at the Division I level. So that's
Yeah.
just keep it up. That's a good thing because we could really use some spring sports success.
Exactly. All right, Ian, I think we'll call it a podcast. So tune in next week where we'll cover more Bemidji State athletic stuff that's going on. Maybe things will get warmer and maybe we'll have more stuff with the spring sports season to talk about. But for now, it's a lot of hockey, which isn't the end of the world.